You're listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast. We're an independent, general interest bookstore putting great reads in the hands of people in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Hosted by resident SKYLITers, we're here to bring you new and exciting author conversations, group reads, and bookseller chats. Happy listening.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to the SKYLIT Books podcast. I'm your host, Mike Jeffrey. SKYLIT Books is an independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. We're open every day from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. and require all customers to wear masks in the store regardless of their vaccination status. We also offer online shopping and curbside pickup through our website, skylitbooks.com, and you can check out our upcoming events on our Crowdcast page, crowdcast.io/skylitbooks. It's my pleasure to be joined by Fernanda Melchor and Sophie Hughes today to talk about Fernanda's newly translated novel, Paradais, which is out from New Directions on April 26th. Born in Veracruz, Mexico in 1982, Fernanda Melchor has been hailed by The Guardian as one of Mexico's most exciting new voices. Her novel Hurricane Season was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, longlisted for the National Book Award, and was a New York Times notable book. Sophie Hughes is a literary translator from Spanish to English. Her translation of Hurricane Season was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize and Dublin Literary Award and longlisted for the National Book Award in Translation and Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. How's it going today?
Hi, Michael.
Hi. I'm really happy to be here talking to you two.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you both. I'm really excited about this book. I really enjoyed it and excited to hear your insights on it.
Unlike Fernanda, this is the first time I've ever spoken to anyone about this book, I think, like on a
podcast. It's true. It's the first time. I've been doing some promotion, but for the German edition. And normally I will do it in Spanish. Here, I live in Berlin right now, and I'm doing the DAD's residency in Berlin. And I normally do it in Spanish, and they translate everything to German. And it's been painfully slow because I'm used to talk and then get translated, and it's been absolutely strange to do that. And it's so I'm so happy to be able to just talk more fluidly about this book, and of course to be with Sophie because I don't think we have ever discussed the book publicly, at least.
No, not publicly. Quite a lot of emails.
Yeah, that's it.
But yeah, never publicly. Yeah.
It's a real honor then. I'm excited for this. And Sophie, you have a little selection to read from your translation?
Yes, I do. We spoke before, so it's an agreed excerpt. Fernanda was saying it's not an easy book to take an excerpt from. So hopefully this will do the trick to give people a flavor. It's from the middle of the novel. It's not the start of the novel. So this is the beginning of the second part of Paradais by Fernanda Melchor. That's how it all began, he'd tell them. A few days later, when they got plastered again with the money Fat Boy lifted from his grandparents and passed on to Polo so that he could buy booze, cigarettes, and those revolting cheesy snacks covered in orange powder, Franco's delicacy. It quickly became a routine. The impatient wait after lunch, the search for the cash in the flower beds, the local store packed with laborers having a quick cold drink before heading back to Boca or to their own communities. The nerve-wracking walk through the abandoned plot and its crumbling mansion, meeting each other at sundown on the dock, the boozing and smoking, Franco Andrade wanging on, Polo snickering to himself, the palliative stupor from the drink, of which there was never as much as Polo would have wanted, scarcely enough to dull the mind, to take the edge off. That's why he drank so fast, almost racing against Franco until the booze had all gone, the cigarettes too, and with them their only means of keeping the hungry mosquitoes at bay, until the lights in Progreso on the other side of the river would start to go out, at which point Polo would be sufficiently wasted to head back to the almost pitch darkness of the undergrowth and past the rustling pile, pushing his bike by the handlebars and singing under his breath, Voy a llenarte toda, toda. Any old tune he might have heard on Zenobio's radio, lentamente y poco a poco. No matter how cheesy or dumb, con mis besos, anything to distract him from the bloody countess who built that solitary palace in the estuary's mangrove swamps, and whose gruesome silhouette, according to the gossips in Progreso, his mother included, of course, would still frighten the wits out of the reckless fools who dared hang around those parts, until finally Polo would emerge on the deserted track, mount his bike, and coast down the hill until he reached the highway shoulder, sweating copiously from the stifling heat and the effort to keep the handlebars steady, so he didn't go crashing headfirst into one of the few cars still driving around at that time of night. No matter how much or how quickly he drank down on the dock, it was never enough to knock him out, to send the world packing, to switch off completely, be free. And all too quickly, the precious trance he'd worked so hard to achieve would dissolve into a throbbing headache that grew more intense each time Polo remembered that in a matter of hours, he'd be back cycling along the very same road, ready to begin a new day in Poxy Paradise.
Thank you so much. That was translator Sophie Hughes reading from Fernanda Melchor's new novel coming out in English on April 26th, Paradise. Fernanda, and that was such a great passage to read. And my first question for you, Fernanda, was about how these books develop this in hurricane season, because they both start with the suggestion of some kind of awful violence in this between, this fairly repulsive boy in a posh development, fat boy who's obsessed with his neighbor. And then in hurricane season with the dead witch in the river. And then the books really kind of journey out. And in the passage Sophie read, you can hear it like these tangents with the bloody countess and her mansion. And so it seemed unlikely to me that you would work from an outline. There's like this sense of discovery that's happening as for the reader. And I wondered for the writer how that process goes.
I really like the passage that Sophie or we chose. I never naturally have picked it because that the novel is. It's a very short novel. It's the manuscript in Spanish. It is, I think, 120 pages, something like that. And Spanish is always like 30% more than it will be in English. In English, it's always more compact. It's more a shortened version. And I always have difficulties in that second part because I built this novel that was going to be very short on the base of two characters, two sceneries, two landscapes. It's always an interplay of opposites. Like you have Franco Andrade, who's a rich, spoiled brat, and you have Polo, who's a working class boy, brown-skinned, really from a town that's been invaded by narcos, and you have this relationship that's very antagonistic, but at the same time cooperative or sort of parasitic. Like a parasitic relationship, and they don't really like each other, but still they attract each other. And the town of Progreso and this community, this gated community, luxury gated community of Paradise, also attract each other in a certain way. And I always planned that this novel had to be very brief, very intense, and very simple in that in that scheme. Like to have two opposite forces always playing and pulling one each other. And at the middle, I had difficulties going from Paradise to Progreso and then back to Paradise. That I always imagine I always imagine this sort of landscape like in a map or in a, I don't know how to say maqueta, Sophie. When you buy, how do you say the architectural, when you go to
like
my
the
God.
plan?
Like when you go buy a house, you go and see the like a small scale representation.
Oh.
No,
Like
it's
architect.
like three-dimensional with small trees and
Like at the
in a
beginning of
similar-
like Piglia's L'ultimo lector, where he's
like you go to a
describing.
real estate, yeah, would you go to a real estate office and there is like a small scale reproduction of the of place you're going to buy, and it's all small with little people and cars, and I always imagine this world like a micro machine, you know, sort of world, and I think that has to do a lot with the sort of narrator that also tells the story. But anyway, I was thinking in relationship to hurricane season that Paradise, all the things that I learned as a writer in matters of character construction, plot construction, and narrative voice, I wanted to put it in Paradise to extreme, like condensed, like even more, you know, faster, louder, like more intense. And in hurricane season, I was trying to create this sort of extreme empathy towards the characters, because horrible things happens, but still you get to see the human side of all these people who are really struggling and suffering, but also committing heinous crimes. But in Paradise, I was just not in the mood of being extremely empathic to them. I really want them to show them as very repulsive boys, as you said it. And I wanted to show how sometimes crime, even though it has an explanation and a reason, I always wanted to show that sometimes it doesn't even make sense. That sometimes crime is committed by stupid boys like Beavis and Butthead, like, and sometimes how masculinity it turns itself into, you know, like a hen with the head cut off, just running in circles, you know, and that's what that is the mood of this book, I think, and that is why it's hard to choose excerpts from it, because it's filled with rage and impulsivity, that masculine, really young masculine impulsivity.
Can you talk a little bit about how, like, you write that angry masculinity so extremely well, and you did a great job too of describing a friendship that's antagonistic, where they don't even seem to really like each other, which was an experience I had in my youth that I had sort of forgotten about, of just by circumstances hanging out with someone and you don't actually even enjoy their company. But it made me wonder if you grew up with brothers, or how you have this insight into what it's like to be an angry teenage boy. You really put your finger on it.
I always been interested in angry young men. I mean, I grew up surrounded by them. I think I have a brother, but he's younger than me, Julio, and he's not really like those kind of guys. It's more like, I think, at home growing up, my father and I always had a distant relationship. So for me, masculinity was sort of a mystery. Like I spent lots of years trying to figure out what men wanted. Men always said that they wonder all the time what the women want. But women, we also ask ourselves that. And I think as a young girl, I grew up longing for masculine support, you know, like masculine admiration, and I just hang out a lot with guys and with boys, and my best friends used to be boys, and I also had an awkward relationship with my own femininity, and so I prefer always a masculine company. So I think I grew up with these guys. I mean, they weren't always like this, but it gets to a time in adolescence, when you found yourself listening to this sort of discourses, and sometimes as a woman, at least for me, growing up in Veracruz in the 90s, it was very natural to express yourself about women like this. And it was very normal to hear men, I don't know, like talking about women like objects, like pieces of meat. Even I think I sort of introject a little bit of those discourses, and for me it was a long act of deconstruction to finally be able to. For me, this is what I do. Like when I write Paradise, when I wrote Hurricane Season, it was a way of taking that out of me, because I grew up with that, and at some point, I even believed some of those things. I identified with that vision of things. And there was a time where I thought that being a woman, it wasn't a very lucky or charming destiny for me. Now I think very differently, but growing up, it was really a struggle. So I think it all, it's shown here. I just wanted to radically put that discourse of these young, angry men. And I know it's risky, but at the same time, I felt like I needed to do that.
That's wonderful. And Sophie, I wondered from your end, the challenges as a translator of trying to, take the profanity and slang from Spanish and bring it into English and keep that anger in there in another language, and what that was like for you as a translator.
I think that because I'm so behind this literary project of Fernanda's, it was love at first read when I ever encountered Fernanda. I've grown to love her as a person and as a friend, as an author to a translator, because that relationship isn't always necessarily easy and close, and it works really well, I think, here. What I love about the project is described a little bit in what Fernanda's just said, and in a way I wish that I was just here as another reader rather than the translator to talk to you about the book, because as I say, it's the first time I'm doing that. But this thing, this being really in a way a project about so much about women, but with so many male characters at the heart of the stories, and with so many few female sympathetic characters, in the wrong mood, in the wrong moment, or the wrong reader perhaps could read the opposite, could find the opposite, could say, well, where are all the women that we're meant to sympathize with? We've got this awful, terrifying, bloody countess. We've got this old bag of a mother. We've got this horrible, sneaky cousin. Where are the women that you're meant to show us that are great and brilliant? But in a way, that is a job that's being done, and that is a voice that's being spoken so loudly in society. Never loudly enough, I want to add. It's a drum we want to keep on banging. But that's what I'm so interested about in this fiction, is that it arrives at some new vision, and it's focusing in on the male gaze. And for it to be a woman doing that is just endlessly interesting, fascinating, and for it to be someone doing it as well as Fernanda is compelling and compulsive. To translate it is a joy. You can imagine the sentences roll. You can hear it. That's actually the first time I've ever read that passage out loud. So maybe it won't come across as well, but it really, as a writer in English of this text that exists in Spanish, it's very, it's a really compulsive activity. And I think I used to say same thing about hurricane season, but in many ways the prose does follow a logic that the prose of hurricane season also seems to follow. There are more full stops in this book, which makes it easier, but also it creates a different rhythm. It creates a different kind of still hypnotic prose, but one weirdly that I think speeds things up even more, which was what Fernanda was saying. This is kind of like a bullet, or like a car going off a cliff. I think you've said before in an interview, where it's just like you jump on in this book and you're in it for the ride, and then you jump out, and it's a bit like, what happened? Translating swear words has never been a problem for me, because I think swearing is one of the most beautifully expressive, ingenious ways that humans have to communicate in a relaxed setting, in a beautiful, like honest, relaxed setting in which they're being themselves, in which they're using language to express how they feel, not constructing it for anyone. And that's why I think it always works so well. And it's really nice because Fernanda has always said to me, just make it convincing swearing. It doesn't have to say the same thing in exactly the same way as the Spanish, because it's not really possible. I mean, I'm sure lots of the listeners are like, you know, bilingual or have like a good knowledge of Spanish or whatever. Like it doesn't, nothing like to know two languages, especially when it comes to something emotional, they don't map onto each other neatly. So you have to find a way to express it in your own language, and that's what Fernanda has always given me the space to do. So it's fun as well as awful, you know. But there's a strange, you know, at least readers in a way get to see what all of that swearing, what all of those sometimes terrible conversations, what all of that language, what all of the poetry, what all of the beauty, how it builds and grows and creates a response in them. As a translator, you have the same thing going on, but with a sense of responsibility of like, and kind of looking at it in a very microscopic way of like, how am I going to construct that same thing in Spanish? How am I going to build that same sense?
Yeah, oh no, go ahead.
No. Sorry. Can I ask Sophie a question about translation? I always thought that when we talk about how you work, and you work very similarly to me, as I remember, you normally go very quickly to a first draft, like very, you know, like I also do the same. I go through a draft and leave all that I can. I give that take that momentum and deliver a first draft, and then I work and rework. And I think you do the same, as we've talked about it. And I wonder if you have different intentions according to the book. For example, is the same intention you had when translating Hurricane Season and translating to Paradise? I have to say I'm sorry if this is not interesting for our listeners. I hope it is, because for me it's very, very interesting, and I sometimes wish I had more time to speak to Sophie about her métier, her work, and that I found fascinating as a translator myself. So I really wanted to ask you, do you have intentions, like particular intentions, when you work on a book or other book?
I don't like have a piece of paper where I write things down, but I definitely always read the book first, just as a reader, and I enjoy it, and then I'll read it. Usually, with this book, I did read it again. One, because it's short, and two, because I did want to precisely pick out where the two books were coming together and where they were moving apart. And I wanted to make sure that I did the same thing. And I always write to Fernanda saying, like, look, there's a really big shift of register in this phrasing or in this word. What's going on here? Who's speaking now? Because it's quite, I mean, everyone listening has presumably read something of Fernanda's or will. So you either have encountered or will encounter third person indirect like speech, and it does sort of slip between voices. So things like that, I always want to double check that it's not just me reading it, that it is there, that there was some intent behind it from the author. And then obviously I have to find a way to do it, to replicate that intent. But with this book, a good example, Fernanda, to answer your question, is in the final section. I translated the whole book, I would say, in the same way that I did with Hurricane Season, just like really trying to beat it out. And then the final section, where it's a load of semicolons, so it's a final scene, the real climax of the novel, an event that we sort of knew was coming, but when it comes, we can't believe we've got there. And in the beginning of that section is described by the narrator as a series of instants that he sees almost as separate shots. And then what precedes is like maybe 7 or 8 pages of one sentence written in, divided by semicolons, of snapshots of things. And what I found myself doing when I translated it was erroneously, like as a mistake, was sort of wanting to make a coherent one sentence instead of like keeping them as separate instants. And later I came and I realized what I'd done. I mean, I think I always would have, because of the way I do a third draft, which is always to look back my second draft is always looking back like line by line with the original, and then I slowly let go of the original as I do the next drafts. But I caught myself doing an intervention that was in this instance unacceptable, and would have changed the rhythm and what was going on in the book. But
that is very interesting. Yes, that was a pain to write that final scene. The whole book, well, it is a very crude book. It is a very intense book. It is. I tried it to be funny. Sometimes it can be very hilarious and in a sort of grotesque way. And you need some humor to emanate from the writing sometimes, and even if it was for building then a more obscure ambience after the humor, but still that particular scene was so difficult to write. I think I spent 3 years writing this novel, and I think in very short but intense periods. And I think I only touched that scene like 3 times in those 3 years. Like I sit and I work on that whole 6-7 pages like 3 times in 3 years. And I always had something to drink. I always had to be, a little bit like Polo. I had to, my conscience just wouldn't like accept it, and it was very hard in my mind. I always thought about that scene. I play it 100 times in my mind, and I had it all choreographed. Like I had the choreography of it, of the movements of the characters in my mind and the spaces, but still I just couldn't write it. And I needed the reader also to pass through that with the same intensity that I used to imagine it. I think for me it's for me, a book is something that you build in the mind of the reader. It's words and it's sentences, but it's like an enchantment. It's like magic, It's like words of a spell, and the words it just, they are more than their meaning. You have to create a rhythm, and you have to create a power with them. So for me, it's very important to choose the strategies which I want to use, and I really appreciate that, Sophie. Really, it's the best gift for a writer to have a translator that really tries to catch us on that and try to reproduce it. And it's always hard translating. It's like pouring some substance into another different glass, without trying to spill over too much. But something is a little bit lost, of course, but still is the effort and the preciseness of it, and also the naturality in which is made, that gives its strength. And I think I'm just so happy to have Sophie as a translator, and she's able to do this.
Well, if the Love Fest is going to happen, then I would like to say that you say that a book is built that, and I agree with you entirely. It's like the words start to build and the rhythms start to do something, and there is a sort of, a magic, or like something's drawing you in and keeping you in and captivating you. But also, for me, the thing that Fernanda does so well is like small observation. And that's what defines her for me as a truly great novelist of our time, is like she has a capacity for observation that doesn't seem at all forced, that it's like she's become her character. Because I was just reading back some of it, and there's a moment, for example, where Polo is just before a terrible crime that's about to take place, and he gets woken up by his accomplice, and he's being woken up and shaken by the other kid. And I know that you must have been him in that moment, for in that moment us to go to a thought of Polo's that it must have been his mother waking him up, telling him to wake up, dickhead, or whatever it is. And suddenly he hears his mother instead of that. Well, as a writer, you must be in that scene, ready to get into the next scene. And yes, she never forgets the other layers of consciousness that are going on in her characters' minds. And I mean, that's what builds a great book, if you ask me.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. What I love about these books is they're so propulsive. You just feel like you're borne along on, and like basically in a river. But at the same time, they demand so much attention from you because they move so well between scenes and between details. So it both feels like it's very easy to read, but also challenging in this way that I find is like such a nice balance. It's sort of like what you were talking about in terms of, a paradox before, and how the opposites of the characters. And yeah, it's just such a feat, and it just makes me admire the translator automatically, because it's like I know it's coming from another language, but it still maintains that energy, and I know that's not an automatic thing. That takes a lot of effort.
Hey, yay. I'm so happy to hear that. It's such a relief.
I recently read the translation, not fully. I just I did the test. That is, I just sit with the book. I just received it. Well, actually, they didn't. Well, I mean, I have the English, the British version of it, and I just my agent just gave me one copy, and I just sat in the sofa of my studio, and I just like that. I read like the first part, like that, like boom, and I try to. It's difficult for me because it's not my language, English, and I have to try to savor the words in my mouth, mind, in the like to hear the sound, because and I just read it from like that, like from start to the end of this first part, and I was like, this is it. I mean, this is it. There are some, I love it because there are some places where the register is a little bit higher, and in the English version it's a little bit lower, and sometimes it goes all the way, but it sort of compensates, and it balances, and I just really liked it, and it is true that it is demanding. It seems easy. It seems as it is written in a voice that tries to emulate colloquial speech. It seems like it's something. Of course, it's an illusion that it's natural, that it's spoken, that it has this spoken quality of it. But at the same time, it is true that I demand a lot of the readers. This is not the kind of book that you can just distract yourself for a few lines and just, I've been there. I've been reading, I love Stephen King's book, but there are novels that I just skip sometimes description, and I only read the dialogues because they're not necessary. But this is not a book that you cannot miss one sentence from the other, and maybe it's too it's asked to us too much, but I think the contrary. I think nowadays we have so much interruptions to concentrate on reading, and as a writer I have to fight against Netflix, and I have to fight against TikTok and all this new media that's at the same time very they don't let you concentrate, but at the same time they absorb your attention completely. So I needed to create, I think, as an answer, as a response to this, I needed to create a flux of words that functions like attention grabber. Like I think this is, for me, this is the only way I can tell these stories without the reader just throwing the book away or losing interest. But for me, it has to be done like this. And I don't know. I've been thinking about other strategies for next books, but at least Paradise and Hurricane Season, they are books that needed this kind of reading, of intensity.
Yeah, it kind of relates, like talking about the demands you make on the reader too, but how that the pace makes it easy to ask that of them, because you're being borne along. You're not bored. Like some books, they demand a lot of the reading because they're boring, and the language is so difficult. And this is the opposite. It has such pace and energy, but you have to be there for each sentence or you will lose the thread. And it kind of relates to me in the way, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, that these books are like sort of unconsoling, and they will show you something very ugly, but they don't try to make it okay. Like you don't try to reveal a silver lining. And I find that very, like you have trust in the reader, you know, like you don't lay out what the reader's moral response should be. And I find that just very empowering to the reader's perspective. And also it gives me the impression that the writer is not writing from an elevated plane. The writer is actually inhabiting these characters. And to me, that just feels like just like the real deal is what I want to say. But it's great. I don't have a question.
I once wrote to a publisher after I read Fernanda for the first time, and I wrote precisely those words. I was like, pay attention. This is the real deal.
That's my literary philosophy. Yeah, basically what you just said. It's very important for me to do that, to be on the ropes with the characters, to be really close to them at the same level, and at the same time, Paradise, I think it's a little bit different because I wanted to create a distance, but I needed to do that because in order to not show only empathy. I mean, you see Polo and you see he's exploited, he has like the most horrible job ever, and his mother is really harsh on him. He has not have an easy life. He doesn't have a very a masculine figure of authority. He lives in a town that's been taken over by narcos. You cannot have a good job, a good life. It's just, he seems like trapped and without a possibility to escape. And that's what he really wants. And you can empathize about a boy who has to live in these conditions. But at the same time, I needed to create this distance because I wanted to show that also he had a power, that it's decision. He makes decisions, and mostly I wanted to show what's the inside of the mind of the mind of somebody who's basically a coward, who's trying to put responsibility away from him, to blame somebody else always, and that's how the book starts. And being the obsessive person that I am, I had to create this narrator that it's also obsessively going over the same things, like a dial, like an old telephone dial. And I just there's so much of there's a story I love, David Foster Wallace, it's in Oblivion. It's called in English, I don't really know. I think it's The Soul is Not
a Smithy.
It's Smithy. The Soul is Not a Smithy. It's a boy with ADH, with is it called that in English? It's in Spanish.
ADHD.
ADHD. So, and he's trying to retell something traumatic that happens to him, but he had losses in his own fantasies. So that whole book is amazing, of short stories, and we will call it novels in Spanish, because we never do short stories so long as in the English literal word. But I just wanted to create this sort of artificial mind that's constantly going over the same things. So this is a novel that, in fact, it's like a novel that's always telling the same things, but it goes closer and closer to other truths while it's telling the same story once over again. And I don't know. I think this was the way it was supposed to be for me. I was very interested not to write from the mind of the boy who's obviously, sick, because Franco, I think he will, there you can catalog him as morbidly obsessed, compulsive. He's bordering the terrains of mental illness. You can see him as a young sexual offender who's beginning his career. But I didn't find that interesting. For me, what was interesting was to be in the mind of the guy who still can make a choice, who still can make decisions. And I think that's what's most tragic about his story, that he's given, not lots of decisions, but he's given a power to act, and he, at every turn, he chooses. He chooses, and he chooses like the worst possible things. yeah.
I had seen, so after I read Hurricane Season when that came out, and it was immediately like, okay, what else has this writer written in Spanish, and what else can we look forward to in translation? It was one of those. And so I saw that you had a story collection, and I wondered if that was going to be translated. I don't know if you can say that or reveal or.
By the time this podcast goes out, I will have delivered it late. So, hi everyone at New Directions.
Amazing.
Yeah, it'll be delivered. Yeah, very, very shortly. I don't know why it has taken me a little bit longer. I think that world events has been the main cause of that. But also because I got so used to translating like propulsive Fernanda, no, that wouldn't let me stop. Whereas with each of these is a self-contained tale, story, account. They're a kind of hybrid genre. Each of them brilliant in their own way. And what's really lovely as a translator is you start to see the genesis and the seeds of lots of the sort of like literary tricks that you'll notice from the novels. But yeah, so that's definitely one to look forward to. I think that fans of Fernanda Melchor will love reading them. They'll come out next year.
In This Is Not Miami, there's all I learned how to write fiction, writing nonfiction. Curiously, it was a time when I really wanted to be a fiction writer, but I was struggling writing my first novel. And I just knew that I still had to write. So I decided that it will be best if I concentrate in real stories and try to figure out how to find an interesting form to tell these stories that weren't particularly mine. I had to make them mine to tell them. But mostly I just had to do research, to investigate. And it was, I learned a lot. And it was like going to the gym, like narrative gym, like I built muscle, and it really helped me to figure out what I wanted to do in fiction by trying to stay close to the real facts. And I think the only piece that's more alike the style that I have in Hurricane Season and Paradise will be La Vida No Vale Nada, because that was the last piece that I wrote for that book, for that particular version of the book, because I published the first edition of This Is Not Miami in 2013, and it was a shorter version of the book. So I wrote La Vida No Vale Nada after writing Hurricane Season. So I have already developed a penchant. It's for that sort of propulsive, intense storytelling.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Fernanda and Sophie. Today's guests were Fernanda Melchor and Sophie Hughes, and we were discussing Fernanda's newly translated novel, Paradais. You can order any of the books we mentioned on today's podcast at skylitbooks.com or swing by and pick them up at the store. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.